This is Bomana Cemetery near Port Moresby, last resting place of hundreds of Australians who gave their lives in World War II. Anzac Day, and native soldiers take prominence wearing medals won in the grim campaigns against the Japanese. At the Cross of Remembrance, all heads are bowed as memories are revived of the grim encounters along the Kokoda Trail of the Owen Stanley Ranges. An imposing backdrop to an unusual Anzac Day service. Two months later, in the Central Highlands of New Guinea, the administrator, Brigadier Cleland, presided at a meeting of the Nondigal Trust on an estate established by Sir Edward Holstrom to develop the breeding of cattle and sheep in the lush Wagi Valley, the valley beneath the clouds. A highly successful experiment bringing the modern know-how of primary industry to these primitive peoples. Later in the year, Port Moresby was again in the news as preparations were made for a visit by the Duke of Edinburgh. The natives came from villages far and wide, sporting their most colourful regalia to welcome the royal visitor. His Royal Highness spent 5 days in the territory before moving down to a North Queensland cattle station at Brunette Downs, where he was given an insight into the beef industry. In a typical straw bush hat and the temperature at 107 degrees, the Duke enjoyed his first Australian cattle roundup in the great outback. Across the heart of the continent at Alice Springs, a church had been erected. This was a special church, a memorial to one of Australia's greatest humanitarians, the Reverend John Flynn, known throughout the world as Flynn of the Inland. They came from all parts of the country to honour his deeds. Prime Minister Menzies and Dame Patty. Qantas Chief Sir Hudson Fysh. The Governor-General Sir William Slim met Flynn's widow. Aborigines, for so many of whom he'd flown thousands of miles to bring healing and spiritual help. Unique in its conception, this church was built by the Inland Mission which Flynn had founded way back in 1912. A visit to Sydney from Lord and Lady Mountbatten, Britain's #1 sailor, the first Sea Lord, uncle of the Duke of Edinburgh. Lady Mountbatten inspected members of the St. John's Ambulance Brigade, an organisation with which she'd been associated in England for many years. And then at Garden Island, Lord Louis, or El Supremo as he was known in the years of World War II, relaxed discipline to call for a stand-easy parade on the flight deck of HMAS Sydney. With HMAS Sydney outmoded and obsolete, HMAS Melbourne arrived from England to become the flagship of the Australian Navy. The mighty carrier had been commissioned only 6 months previously and was equipped with a flock of gannets and venoms for new techniques of anti-submarine and fighter operations. The latest and largest addition to our fleet was brought across the world by Captain Gattaker. On the other side of the world, the USS aircraft carrier Essex was on manoeuvres. As Lieutenant Herbert Camp and his Cougar jet returned to the flat top, watch this amazing picture as the arresting gear of the Essex fails, and the jet, with its wheels buckled, plunges into the water. Lieutenant Camp, keeping his head, can be seen in the cockpit of his ill-fated Cougar as rescue operations are carried out successfully. The pilot, none the worse for his ducking, proving again that the Navy looks after its own. In the early hours of the morning of the 2nd of August, the 640-ton Birchgrove Park, bound from Newcastle to Sydney, was battling against headwinds and rough seas off Broken Bay when her cargo of coal shifted. Within minutes, the collier had capsized and sank, and the pilot steamer Captain Cook was quickly on her way. The British submarine Thorough, joined by 2 minesweepers, a boom defense vessel, 5 merchant ships and Neptune bombers from Richmond Air Force Base were also in the search. Of the crew of 14 of the Birchgrove Park, only 4 survived. 2 struggled ashore unaided at Lobster Bay, while the submarine Thorough and the minesweeper Walker each picked up a swimmer 4 miles offshore, about 6 hours after the collier had plunged to the bottom. Another sea tragedy on the New South Wales coast claimed hundreds of lives, but this time the victims were all killer whales. Aptly named Treachery Beach, north of Newcastle, scene of the mass suicide as the whales, some of them 15 feet long, became stranded in the shallows. And phew, what a problem they became. Mother Nature was in one of her angriest moods in mid-March, and the North Queensland port of Cairns was the target of her sudden whim, the worst cyclone for 30 years. The wind velocity topped 100 miles an hour, transforming a trim town into a museum of freak damage. Whirlwinds of tremendous velocity lashed buildings and homes to pieces. Miraculously, there was no loss of life, but many farmers lost their livelihood as the cyclonic invader cut a swathe of damage estimated at $4 million through the rich cane fields. In the north, wind, but down south around the lower Murray, it was water. Weeks of drenching continuous rain, followed by floods which broke the banks of the mighty river, wreaking widespread havoc on the countryside. The lower Murray dairying district was practically wiped out. Orchard and vineyard losses soared past the $10 million mark. But again, there was no loss of life, except perhaps one of the 9 belonging to this fellow. But death struck swiftly during a blizzard on Mount Kosciuszko. Sleeping in a 4-year-old 3-storied snow lodge at the 6,000 feet level were 10 young skiers, 6 men and 4 women. Suddenly, a 100-yard wide avalanche of snow and ice crashed down the side of Mount Clark, engulfing the lodge. 2 men dug their way out and staggered to another lodge for help. Rescuers worked frantically to extricate the victims trapped beneath the snow, ice and shattered timber. A heavy table saved 2 girls from being crushed by roof beams. Of the 10 occupants of the lodge, 9 escaped. But 20-year-old Rosalind Vesey had died instantly as she slept. The first avalanche victim in Australian skiing history. A 1,000 miles northeast of the Alps, Norfolk Island, discovered and named by Captain Cook. And to mark the centenary of the commencement of free settlement on the island, dressed in costumes of the period, the landing of Pitcairn Islanders was reenacted. Official guest was Governor General Sir William Slim and Lady Slim, who unveiled a plaque commemorating this historic event. A turbulent period with a background of mutiny, vividly recalled on this June day in 1956.